Hi, welcome to another Unity from Scratch mobile development tutorial. This is part 2 of an Angry Birds recreation. So far we've added in a football and a slingshot, and if I just press play you'll see that we get a line renderer that's created as the elastic on the slingshot, and we can drag and release the football and it will travel in the direction with the same amount of force you would expect from the amount you've pulled the elastic back. So if it's just here, you get a little bit like that. So that's where we're at so far. Now we're going to expand on this environment by creating a structure that we're going to knock down, as well as adding in a ground. So I've got some grass here, grass texture. I'll just put my scene back into 2D view so we can see what's going on a bit better. I'm going to grab that grass. It's again a sprite, and I'll add it into the environment. And you want to put it in at about sort of the right height, I guess, not too much grass. Then with that grass, I'm going to duplicate it across the bottom of the scene. But before I do, I want to add a collider to it so the football will actually land on top of the grass. So with that grass selected in the hierarchy, we will add component. And it will be a 2D collider, and I'll add a box collider. It'll probably be the best shape for that. And you can see that it takes up the whole sprite. Now, if you want the grass to be like colliding just down here so that the ground is a bit lower, you can modify the size of it. So if I change the Y size of that collider, you can see how it changes it with the green around it. And then I will move it down by modifying the offset for it. So the ground collider itself is lower than where the actual image of that sprite for that grass is. Now that I've done that, I can actually Control D, hit W, and then just drag this across in the Y direction to create more ground. Control D. And you can do this for as much grass as you like. If you have a longer image than I do, then you might not need to duplicate it. Okay, so now we have some ground. Now just to test the football, let's press play. Let's release the football. Whoa, too much. Only want a little bit. So that's just... Okay, you can see that the football now lands on the ground. Next thing you'll want to do is build a structure. So I've got some planks that I've brought in here. Again, it's a sprite, and you might actually need to resize it. To get it to about the size that you want. And to that plank, we need to add a box collider 2D, which will sit neatly around it because of the actual design of that sprite itself. And you'll probably want to rotate it at 90 degrees up and across if you're building a sort of tower. So just to set it to perfectly to 90, you'll want to go over into the inspector and type in 90 for its Z rotation. And then move it down, this one in particular, and you want to line that up where the collider for the grass is. So if I just see if I can find it there. Okay, so now we can get in a bit closer. You'll be able to see what's going on here. You can see that the collider for the grass, which is this green line here, is overlapping with the plank. See, what's going to happen when you put the plank down is it's going to fall down and sit on top of the grass. So just get it to about there. That's not too bad. And also onto that plank you want to add a rigid body 2D. And leave gravity and all the other settings as they are. Later on, as you start playing the game and shooting the football around, it's the mass of the football and the mass of these planks that you may need to modify to get a better result. from the physics system, because you don't want these to be like paper or something where they just get knocked over really easily. Right, so now that I've got this plank set up with my colliders and rigid body, I can just duplicate it and move it around. I'm just going to make a really simple tower like this. And then I want some planks under here as well, which aren't rotated at 90, so I'll just put it back to there. And like that. Okay, now when we press play, this should all just settle down nicely and sit like that. And when I use the football over here, I'll be able to shoot it out and it will affect it with the physics system doing all the work for us. Currently, when we shoot the ball flies over the screen and then off the screen. Now, we want to have like two sections where the camera is going to be showing. First of all, this part where the shooting is happening. And then as the ball reaches a certain spot, we want the camera to just naturally travel across to where the destruction is going on. So we'll need a little bit of code to do that. So I've already written this camera mover code. So it's camera mover with a capital C and a capital M, C# file. And in that, let's just open it up and have a look. It's quite short. It's going to be attached to the football because the football is going to trigger when the camera moves. So when the football gets almost to the edge of the screen on its journey, it will trigger the camera to just slide across. So the camera, in this case, it has a X start position of where the camera will start from. It then has an ending position of where the camera is going to be positioned when it's slid across to the other side of the screen. And then it has this X trigger position as well, which is where the football will trigger the camera to start moving. We also have a speed for how fast you want the camera to slide across. Now at the start function will set the camera's position to the start position for you. So it lines it up all ready to go. Then in the update, it will test for the position of the football, its X position. Okay, we're only talking about moving the camera across the screen in the X direction, not in any other direction. So when the X position of the ball hits our trigger X position, then we're going to move the camera from its current position across to its end position, which means working out the vector between where the camera currently is and where it needs to be, which is here, and then performing a lerp. And the lerp will do an linear interpolation between the camera's current position and the camera's ending position, and it will just slide it across naturally. So the contents of the lerp function is this bit here that's on this next line, because otherwise it would have been quite long. All right, so save that and put that onto the football. So grab camera mover and put it on your football here. All right, so first of all, we need to figure out what the X start position is for the camera. So if you just click on the camera where it currently is located, if you want this to be the starting position, then grab its position, which is 0.37. And for the football start, put 0.37 as the X start. Now, where do you want the camera to finish? Select the camera and drag it across to where the scene might end. So let's say about there. You don't want to go any further than where your grass is, because you'll be able to see it naturally. So let's say that's the last position of the camera. So that's 13.3 for me. And we'll go back to the football and put the end as 13.3. Now, the next setting is the trigger. So where is that football going to be in its X position that will then trigger the camera to move. So with the football selected, move it to where you want it to start sliding the camera. So maybe about there. That would be 4.35. Okay, so down in this X trigger, I'm going to put 4.35. And before we test it, we'll just move the football back to its starting position. And then press play. Okay, so you can see that that code immediately reset the camera for us to the starting position, which saves you sliding the camera all over the place to realign it. Then if we shoot the football, when it got to the trigger position, it actually made the camera slide across to the final part of the scene that you can see there. So you can have another go at shooting the scene after the football has flung to the far edge and things have stopped moving in the scene. You want the camera to go back, and the ball too, to its original location so you can have another slingshot. Now, there's a little bit of setting up to get the scene to do that. But basically what we're going to do is grab all the rigid bodies in the scene and test if they're moving. And if they're still moving, then we won't reset the scene. But if everything has kind of stopped moving and settled down, then it will reset the scene. First of all, we need to make sure that the football itself doesn't fly off the edge of our scene and never come back again. So you might want to put some kind of a barrier here. And you just need a 2D collider. Now, I might grab one of these planks and just use that in this case, just to make life simpler. And just stretch it out. Now remember, you won't be able to see this because it's actually off the edge of the screen, and all I want is the 2D collider that is attached to that plank. So I'm going to call it, let's call it border, and get rid of its rigid body because it doesn't need to do anything. Alright, so that will stop the ball from flying over the edge of the scene. Because if it does fly over the edge of the scene and you're still testing for objects moving, that ball will be falling into infinity and it will actually still be moving. Now to the code. So the code that we're going to modify actually is both of the scripts that we've done so far. But first of all, the shoot ball code is going to change like this. First of all, we're adding in 3 variables at the top. First is an array of 2D rigid bodies, and that's going to pick up all of the rigid bodies in the scene so that we can test if they're still moving. We're then going to add this Boolean value of test movement. When it's true, we will then go in and test whether things are moving around in the scene, but while it's false, we won't. We don't want to test all of the time for things moving, because sometimes things will be moving, but if you try and do it every single update, it's just going to make your game really laggy. So not a good idea. We only want to test if things are still moving after we've released the football. Then finally, a public link to the ball itself so that we can call some code that's on it. And this is the link that I removed at the beginning of the tutorial because I'd forgotten what I used it for. But now that I remember, you have to put it back in. So that's it there. Those are the 3 things. Okay, now down in the start function, we're adding a line that will fill up our rigid body 2D array with all of the objects in the scene that are of type rigid body 2D. So find objects of type will go and grab all of the rigid body 2Ds that are in your scene and stick them into this array. Now, this is quite labor-intensive function, which is why we're doing it in the start. You don't want to do it every time you need to gather up all the rigid body 2D objects because it's just going to be too inefficient. So we do it at the start, we store them in an array, and then we just keep working on that particular array. Now, the function that's going to do all our testing for us is this one here. So test for movement, which I've included after the start function before the update function. We're going to loop through all of the 2D rigid bodies and count the ones that have a magnitude of velocity greater than 5, which means they're still moving. Now, you can set this here, this 5, to like 0 if you want everything to be dead still before you make the camera zip back to the start. But, you know, it's not necessary. You might just want to start the level again when there's still things slightly moving around. Anyway, this will test how many things are still moving and count them. Now, when this count eventually gets down to 0, where there's nothing moving, it's going to call a reset function that we'll be adding onto the ball, which will be inside of the camera mover script. And when we do this reset, just before, we'll set our test movement Boolean value back to false, so we turn off the testing. Now that testing is happening inside the update function right at the top. So if test movement is true, then we run our test movement function. And test movement only becomes true when we've released a hold on the ball. So down in the end phase for our touch and our mouse button up section, we're going to, as the last part of that if statement in here, is put test movement equals true. So that will then trigger this part to start running and doing those tests. Okay, so you need to do that in there in order for the testing to start. And that's all that you need to do with shoot ball. So I'm going to save that, and we'll go back and open up the camera mover script. In camera mover, we're adding a reset function, which is here, and this is the one being called from the other script. We're also adding in a starting position and a starting rotation value at the top. This will be the starting position of the ball, and this will be the starting rotation of the ball. Now, these two things are actually set automatically inside the start function, so that wherever you start the ball off right at the beginning of the game, it's going to store those so that it can put the ball back at those positions when you reset. And that reset then happens here. So we set the camera to the X start that we recorded before, and we're actually using up here in the start function. And then we set the ball's position and the ball's rotation back to wherever it started from. Right, so save those, and let's go over into the game environment and run it. So when I shoot the ball, things are going to move around, and when they stop moving enough, it resets, as you saw there. Now, a few other things that you're noticing now that this is going. First of all, the ball, when it reappears in the scene, is it still has a fair bit of physics stuff going on with it, and you can see it bounce back in, because all we're doing in the code is we're putting it back at the start position, but we're not turning off any forces that are still acting on it. So it will continue to tumble and roll around. To do that, we need to set the velocity of the ball back to 0 when we reset the scene. Now, this is easily controlled in the camera mover script inside of our reset function here. We can, at the same time we set the ball back to the starting position, is set its rigid body dot get component rigid body 2D dot velocity to 0. And I might just get rid of that new, I don't need that there. Okay, so let's save that and go back and run. Fling the ball. Now, the other problem is that it's going back and the velocity's taken off it, but you'll notice that it drops, and that's because the is kinematic for the ball, if we go and look at it at this point in time, is now turned off. Whereas when we start at the beginning, we have it turned on to ensure that we don't get any gravity until we've released the ball. So we can also put that in the code to fix it, is to turn that back on. So we need all of this is kinematic equals true. Save that. Let's have another go. And all right, so I'll leave this part for now, and in the next section we'll actually look at adding some pigs into the scene and modifying their health based on how much they get bashed up.